I picked up my phone and stared at the number on the screen. Not because I was nervous, because I had already decided. The settlement had cleared 3 days earlier. $2.4 million sitting in an account my mother didn't know existed, my brother didn't know existed, and my aunt hadn't even thought to ask about. The lawsuit had taken 4 years. 4 years of depositions and counteroffers, and my lawyer, a quiet woman named Patricia who always wore the same silver bracelet, telling me to be patient, to let the process work. And it did. My father had built a small industrial supply company in Mississauga through the 80s and 90s. Nothing glamorous. Safety equipment, warehouse fittings, that kind of thing. When he died, the estate was tied up in a dispute with a former business partner who claimed a verbal agreement entitled him to 30% of the company's assets. The case dragged. My mother grew impatient and eventually stopped asking about it. My brother had already convinced himself there was nothing coming. But I kept paying Patricia's retainer every quarter, and I kept showing up. The final number, after legal fees and taxes, was $2.4 million. I told no one. My husband, we had been married 3 years, together for 6, was the one who suggested it, not cruelly. He said it gently. Over dinner, the night Patricia called us with the final number. We were sitting at our kitchen table in our apartment in Hamilton, the kind of table we had found at a garage sale, and repainted ourselves because we couldn't afford anything better at the time. He put down his fork and looked at me for a long moment. "Don't tell them yet," he said. "Not until we know what we're dealing with." I asked him what he meant. He just said, "You know what I mean." And I did. I had watched my mother loan my brother $40,000 for a landscaping business that lasted 8 months. I had watched my aunt move into my parents' house after her divorce and stay for 2 years without offering a dollar toward the utilities. I had watched my family the way you watch weather, always knowing what was coming, never quite believing it until it hit. So I didn't tell them. What I told them was that the lawsuit had finally settled, and it had settled badly. The partners' claims were partially upheld. After legal fees, there was almost nothing. My brother actually sighed on the phone. Not for me, I could tell, but for himself. I said I was okay. I said I was managing. We moved ahead with our lives. My husband and I had been quietly looking at houses. Nothing dramatic, a semi-detached in Dundentis we had been watching for months. We bought it without mentioning it to anyone. We paid cash for the down payment, kept our mortgage modest, and told my mother we had saved up over years. She came to see the house once, walked through it, said the kitchen was small. That was October. By January, things had started to shift. My brother called me on a Tuesday afternoon, which was unusual. We were not particularly close in the way people mean when they say that. We talked at Christmas, at birthdays, at my mother's insistence. He asked how I was doing in the careful way people ask when they want you to ask them back. I asked how he was doing. He was having some cash flow problems, he said. Not serious, just timing. He had a contract coming in March, and he needed to bridge about $15,000 until then. He wasn't asking me exactly. He was just, mentioning it. I said I was sorry to hear that. I said I'd barely been keeping my head above water myself, what with the settlement falling through. He said, of course. He said not to worry about it. He called again 3 weeks later and asked for $8,000. I said no. My mother called me the day after that and said I needed to think about family, that my brother was in a hard spot, that this was what family did for each other. I sat in my car in the parking lot of a Loblaws and listened to her tell me that I had always been the practical one, the responsible one, which was her way of saying I should hand over money I wasn't supposed to have. I said I was sorry. I said I just didn't have it. There was a silence on the phone that I recognized. It was the silence that came before the shift, before she stopped being my mother and became the person who kept score. She said, "I see." And after that, things moved quickly. My aunt called the following weekend. She and I had always had a pleasant enough relationship. She was my mother's younger sister, had lived through a difficult divorce in her late 40s, and had a way of framing requests as confidences. She said she was worried about me, said I sounded stressed, said she hoped I knew I could talk to her. I said I was fine. She said she had been thinking about downsizing and was wondering if I had any room in my new house for a few of her boxes. Just temporarily. Maybe 3 months, while she figured out her living situation. I said we were still getting settled ourselves. She said, of course, of course. But if I changed my mind, I didn't change my mind. By February, the invitations had stopped. Not formal invitations. We're not that kind of family. But the casual ones. The Sunday dinners. The group texts about what to get my mother for her birthday. I was no longer included in those. When I noticed and mentioned it to my husband, he nodded slowly, the way he does when something has confirmed something he already suspected. "They've written you off," he said. "I know. Are you okay with that?" I thought about it honestly. I don't know yet. What happened next was not something I planned alone. My husband had been thinking about it for weeks, I realized later, quietly and methodically, the way he approaches most things. He works in risk assessment, commercial insurance, industrial clients, and he has a specific mind for systems, for what holds and what breaks under pressure. He came to me one evening in late February with a piece of paper. Not dramatic, just an idea. The idea was this: we would let them believe they had been right all along, that I was struggling, that the house was a stretch, that we were behind on payments, that we were considering selling. He had drafted a version of a text message, casual, tired sounding, that I would send to my mother, just checking in, just saying things were harder than we'd let on. I read it twice. I sent it. Within 48 hours, my mother called and said she needed to talk to me about something important. Could I come for dinner that Saturday? She was making roast chicken, which was what she made when she wanted the evening to feel significant. We went. My brother was there with his girlfriend. My aunt was there. They had set the table with the good dishes, which my mother only brought out for Christmas, and for occasions when she wanted to communicate that something mattered. The roast chicken was good. The conversation was careful. Near the end of the meal, after my husband had gone to the kitchen to refill the water pitcher, my mother looked at me and said she had been talking to the family. She said they were concerned. She said that given my situation, it might make more sense for me to sell the house and move back into my childhood bedroom while I got back on my feet. She and my aunt had discussed it. My aunt could stay in the guest room, she was between places anyway, and my brother could have access to the garage for his equipment. She said this as though she were offering me something. I looked at her across the table with the good dishes and the roast chicken and the water pitcher my husband was refilling in the kitchen, and I understood, finally and completely, what my husband had known from the beginning. This was not about helping me. This was about the house. They wanted the house. Not explicitly, they would never say it that plainly. But the logic was clean. If I sold, there would be proceeds. If I moved home, I would be dependent. If I was dependent, I would be grateful. And if I was grateful, I would be manageable. My husband came back to the table and set down the water pitcher. He looked at me. I gave him a small nod. He said, "Actually, there's something Cassandra and I have been meaning to share with you all." My mother looked at him. He said that things had actually changed significantly for us in recent months. That the settlement, the one I had told them had fallen through, had in fact resolved more favorably than we had initially let on. That we had wanted to be careful about announcing it until everything was finalized and the funds were properly arranged. My aunt said, "What do you mean, more favorably?" He told them the number. The table went quiet in a way I had never heard a table go quiet before. It wasn't dramatic. It was the sound of a specific kind of calculation stopping mid-process. My mother set down her fork. My brother looked at his girlfriend and then looked away. My aunt looked at me for a long moment and then said carefully, "Well, that's wonderful news." It didn't sound like wonderful news. It sounded like a door closing. My husband said, calmly and without any particular emphasis, that we had appreciated everyone's concern over the past few months, that it had been genuinely useful, that we now had a very clear picture of things we hadn't been certain about before. No one asked what he meant. They all understood. My brother left early, said he had an early morning. His girlfriend said it had been lovely, and I believed her. She had nothing to do with any of this, and I felt briefly sorry for her, tied to someone whose reflexes ran in that direction. My aunt excused herself to use the restroom and didn't come back to the table. She said goodbye from the hallway. My mother and I sat at the table with the good dishes for a few minutes after everyone had gone. She didn't say much. She said she hoped I understood that she had only been trying to help. I said I knew. We both knew that wasn't quite true, but it was the kindest available version of the evening. I kissed her on the cheek at the door. The drive home was quiet. My husband reached over and put his hand on mine somewhere on the 403 and didn't say anything. He didn't need to. I want to be honest about what I felt. Because I think people expect a certain kind of story here, the triumphant reveal, the poetic justice, the satisfaction of watching people who underestimated you suddenly recalibrate. And there was some of that. I won't pretend there wasn't. But mostly what I felt was tired. There is a particular kind of grief that comes with understanding your family clearly, not dramatically, not in a single shattering moment, but slowly, through accumulation, through the calls that only came when something was needed, through the silence in the group texts, through the good dishes brought out not for celebration but for strategy. I had suspected these things about my family for a long time. What the last few months had done was remove my ability to explain them away. My brother and I have spoken twice since that dinner. Both times were brief and practical. My mother and I talk every few weeks. She asks about the house. I ask about her garden, and we move carefully around everything we both know. My aunt sends me forwarded emails occasionally, recipes mostly. I don't write back. My husband and I have since had the kitchen properly renovated, not extravagantly, but properly. We have a dog now, a shepherd mix named after a hiking trail in Algonquin where we spent a weekend last fall. We have people over on Fridays, friends who know us, who have sat at that garage sale table we repainted and stayed until midnight talking about nothing important. It is a good life. I want to be clear about that. I don't tell this story because I am angry. I tell it because I spent years making myself smaller, so the people around me would feel more comfortable, and it still wasn't enough. And I needed to understand that before I could stop. If there is something I have learned from all of this, it is not that family is always dangerous or that trust is always a mistake. It is something simpler and harder, that how someone responds when they believe you have nothing left is the most accurate information you will ever have about them. I didn't need to be rich to matter, but I needed to see what happened when they thought I wasn't. That's the part I hold on to, not the number, not the dinner, not the look on my aunt's face in the hallway. The drive home, his hand on mine, the highway lights moving across the windshield, the dog waiting at the door when we got back. That is what I chose, and I would choose it again. I've been thinking about Patricia lately. Not about the case, not about the number she called me with that evening, but about something she said to me early on, maybe 6 months into the process, when I was exhausted and considering settling for far less than we were owed. She said, "The people who get to the end of these things are the ones who can sit with uncertainty without letting it make their decisions for them." I didn't fully understand what she meant at the time. I think I do now. There is a kind of integrity that doesn't announce itself. It just shows up, quietly, in the choices you make when no one is watching and nothing is guaranteed. For 4 years, I kept paying a retainer I could barely afford, kept showing up to appointments, kept believing that doing the right thing slowly was still doing the right thing. That is not something I would have called courage at the time. It felt more like stubbornness. But looking back, I think those two things are often the same. What my husband did, suggesting we wait, drafting that careful message, sitting at that dinner table and saying what needed to be said without cruelty, that came from the same place. He didn't act out of anger. He acted from a clear understanding of what was actually happening and what we needed to know before we could move forward. That kind of clarity is something I have come to deeply respect. It is not coldness. It is the opposite of coldness. It is paying close enough attention to know what something really is, even when it is dressed up as something else. The hardest part of this whole experience was not the dinner. It was not watching my aunt disappear down the hallway, or hearing my brother say he had an early morning. It was the slow, unglamorous work of sitting with what I had learned and deciding what to do with it. Because understanding something and knowing how to carry it are two different things entirely. I didn't cut anyone off dramatically. I didn't send a message laying out everything I knew. I just stopped making myself available in ways that cost me more than they returned. That sounds simple. It is, in practice, one of the harder things I have ever done, because it required me to stop hoping that the version of my family I wanted to exist would eventually show up if I just gave them enough chances. What I have now is smaller and quieter and more honest than what I thought I wanted. A house in Dundas. A dog with a ridiculous name. Fridays that go until midnight. A husband who hands me water and doesn't need to explain why. I think about what Cassandra, my own name, the one I carry, means. The mythological figure who could see the truth and wasn't believed. I used to find that story sad. I don't anymore. She still knew. And knowing, even when it costs you something, is always better than the comfort of not knowing. Whatever life asks of you, the answer is almost never to make yourself smaller so others feel safer. Be honest about what you see. Be patient with what takes time. And when someone shows you who they are, clearly, unmistakably, at a table with the good dishes, believe them the first time.